To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan adjusted his tactical vest one final time before heading out on what would be his last patrol in Kandahar. 28 years old, built like a linebacker with steel gray eyes that had seen too much, Cole had spent the better part of 6 years serving his country in the most dangerous corners of the world. His hands, calloused from weapons training and hardened by desert sand, wore a simple gold wedding band that caught the Afghan sun. Back home in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, his wife Amy and 8-year-old daughter Sophie represented everything pure in his world. Amy, a former nursing student with auburn hair and green eyes, had captured his heart during their college years at Eastern Kentucky University. She possessed an infectious laugh and a way of making even the darkest days seem brighter. Sophie, their miracle child after 3 miscarriages, had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's determination. Cole's background was forged in adversity. Raised by a single mother in the hollers of Eastern Kentucky after his father abandoned them when Cole was 7, he learned early that the world was unforgiving to the weak. His mother, Martha, worked double shifts at the local diner to keep food on the table, teaching Cole that loyalty was everything and betrayal was unforgivable. When local bullies targeted him for his second-hand clothes and absent father, Cole didn't run to authority figures. He handled it himself, often with his fists. By high school, he had earned a reputation as someone you didn't cross. The military had been Cole's ticket out, but more than that, it had refined his natural inclinations into something lethal and precise. Special Forces training had taught him patience, strategy, and 50 different ways to neutralize a threat. His teammates knew him as the man who never left anyone behind, but also the one who showed no mercy to enemies. Cole's moral code was simple: protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and destroy those who threatened what was his. Amy had met him during his brief stint at college on the GI Bill. She was studying nursing, drawn to helping others, while he was pursuing criminal justice with plans for law enforcement. Their courtship was passionate and intense. Amy was attracted to Cole's protective nature and unwavering loyalty, while he found in her a softness that balanced his hard edges. They married after 2 years, and Sophie arrived 3 years later, completing what Cole considered his perfect life. Amy's background was markedly different. Raised in suburban Louisville by overprotective parents who owned a small accounting firm, she had lived a sheltered life until college. Her parents, Gerald and Linda Patterson, had wanted Amy to marry within their social circle, someone safe, predictable, and financially stable. Cole's military career and blue-collar roots had been tolerable only because of his obvious devotion to their daughter. But Amy had grown restless over the years. Cole's frequent deployments left her feeling isolated and overwhelmed. The base housing was a far cry from her childhood home, and the other military wives seemed to form cliques she couldn't penetrate. Sophie's challenging behavior following each of Cole's departures added stress Amy felt unprepared to handle. She had grown to resent the military lifestyle and, by extension, Cole's unwavering commitment to it. Troy Hendricks had entered their lives 6 months ago as the new civilian contractor for base recreation programs. At 32, Troy was everything Cole wasn't: smooth-talking, well-dressed, and immediately present. His background as a former college athlete turned youth program director gave him easy access to military families. Troy was handsome in a polished way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed designed to put people at ease. What the base families didn't know was that Troy's previous position in Tennessee had ended under mysterious circumstances involving inappropriate relationships with single mothers. He had a pattern of targeting lonely military wives, using their vulnerability and his practiced charm to create emotional dependencies. Troy wasn't just a predator. He was calculating, studying each family's dynamics before making his move. Amy had been attending Sophie's after-school activities when Troy first approached her. His compliments seemed genuine, his interest in Sophie's welfare touching. He listened to Amy's frustrations about military life with understanding nods and sympathetic responses. Gradually, their conversations extended beyond the recreation center to coffee meetings, then dinners while Sophie was at sleepovers. Sophie had noticed the changes in her mother first. Amy was suddenly more concerned with her appearance, spending money on new clothes and makeup. She was distracted during their evening routines, often checking her phone and smiling at messages. When Sophie asked about it, Amy would brush off her questions with vague responses about making new friends. The affair had begun 3 months into Troy's pursuit. Amy rationalized it as filling a void Cole's absence had created, but the reality was that Troy had systematically broken down her defenses. He spoke of futures without military obligations, of stability and presence that Cole couldn't provide. Troy painted himself as the solution to all of Amy's discontent. Sophie's resistance to Troy had been immediate and instinctive. Children often possess an intuitive understanding of threat that adults have learned to suppress. When Troy began staying overnight, Sophie retreated into herself, becoming withdrawn and defiant. Her grades suffered, and her teachers reported behavioral changes that concerned them. Cole's last video call home had been routine until he noticed Amy's new haircut and jewelry. When he asked about them, her explanations seemed rehearsed. Sophie had appeared distant, responding to his questions with single-word answers. Something felt wrong, but Cole attributed it to the normal strain of deployment separation. Now, as Cole prepared for extraction in 2 weeks, he carried photos of his girls and plans for their future. He had been considering a transition to civilian law enforcement, possibly accepting a detective position with the Louisville Metro Police that would keep him home. The timing seemed perfect. Sophie was approaching her teenage years and would need her father's guidance more than ever. Cole's commanding officer, Major Rick Valdez, had become more than a superior. He was a friend who understood the sacrifices military families made. Valdez had watched Cole's unwavering dedication to both his duty and his family, often commenting that Cole was the kind of man who made the service proud. The two men had shared countless conversations about the challenges of balancing military service with family life. As Cole checked his communication device for messages from home, he felt the familiar pang of missing his daughter's bedtime stories and Amy's late-night conversations. Tomorrow's patrol would be routine, sweeping a sector they had cleared dozens of times before. In 14 days, he would board a transport home to the life he had spent 6 years building and protecting. He had no way of knowing that 2,000 miles away, his 8-year-old daughter was about to make a choice that would change everything. Sophie had reached her breaking point with Troy's increasingly aggressive demands for respect and obedience. Her mother's boyfriend had been escalating his control over their household, making rules about Sophie's behavior and punishing her when Amy wasn't around. The foundation of Cole Brennan's world was about to crumble, but from that destruction would emerge something far more dangerous than the decorated soldier who had served his country with honor. What was coming would test every principle Cole had lived by, and ultimately reveal the lengths a father would go to protect his child and exact justice on those who betrayed his trust. Chapter 2. The Shattering. The call came at 0347 hours, jolting Cole from the light sleep that was all a soldier could afford in a hostile environment. The secure satellite phone in the communications tent was reserved for emergencies, deaths, critical injuries, or family crises that required immediate attention. Cole's stomach dropped as he recognized the number displayed on the caller ID, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Major Valdez had accompanied him to take the call, understanding that whatever news awaited would likely require official consideration. Cole's hands remained steady as he accepted the phone, but his jaw tightened with apprehension. Staff Sergeant Brennan, this is Nurse Jennifer Morrison from Walter Reed. Your daughter Sophie has been admitted to our pediatric unit. The words hit Cole like incoming artillery. His voice remained controlled, years of military training suppressing the immediate panic. What's her condition, ma'am? She has a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured left arm. She was injured in a fall downstairs at your home. Sir, I need to patch you through to her doctor, but first. The nurse's voice dropped to a whisper. Sophie specifically asked to speak with you. She says it's important. Cole's vision narrowed to a pinpoint of focus as the video connection stabilized. The hospital room appeared on the small screen, and then his daughter's face filled the frame. Sophie's left eye was swollen shut, her arm encased in a bright pink cast that seemed grotesquely cheerful against the backdrop of medical equipment. But it was the look in her remaining visible eye that stopped Cole's heart, a mixture of pain, fear, and desperate relief at seeing her father's face. Daddy. Sophie's voice was small and hoarse. I'm here, baby girl. Daddy's here. Cole's voice was gentle, but Major Valdez could see the storm building behind his friend's eyes. Your daughter is here, sir. Nurse Morrison's voice could be heard off camera, and Cole caught a glimpse of his wife Amy in the background, speaking in hushed tones with a tall blonde man Cole didn't recognize. Sophie's next words would replay in Cole's mind for the rest of his life. Daddy, Mom's friend forced me to call him Dad, and when I refused, he pushed me down the stairs. The phone trembled in Cole's grip as Sophie continued, tears streaming down her bruised face. He said you weren't coming back, and I had to forget about you. When I said I would never call him Daddy, he got really mad. He grabbed my arm, and I fell. Through the video connection, Cole heard the nurse whisper to someone off camera, "He's down the hall. With your wife." Cole's transformation was immediate and terrifying. The caring father disappeared, replaced by something cold and predatory. Major Valdez had seen Cole in combat, had watched him eliminate threats with clinical efficiency, but this was different. This was personal. Sophie, listen to Daddy very carefully. Cole's voice was steady but carried an undertone that made even the seasoned Major shift uncomfortably. I want you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning. Can you do that for me? Sophie nodded and began her story, each word carving deeper into Cole's soul. Troy had been staying over regularly for the past month, asserting authority over household rules and Sophie's behavior. He had implemented a bedtime routine that included Sophie saying goodnight to him as Dad, something that made her physically ill. When Amy was working her part-time shifts at the base clinic, Troy had become increasingly aggressive about enforcing his rules. The incident had occurred 3 days ago when Sophie had openly defied Troy's demand that she call him father in front of visiting neighbors. In a rage, Troy had grabbed Sophie's arm with enough force to leave bruises, then shoved her toward the stairs leading to her room. Sophie had lost her balance and tumbled down the full flight, landing hard on the tile floor below. Amy had returned home to find Sophie unconscious at the bottom of the stairs, with Troy claiming the child had tripped while running upstairs. The story had satisfied the initial emergency response team, but inconsistencies in the timeline and Sophie's injuries had raised red flags among the medical staff. The doctors here are asking lots of questions, Sophie whispered into the phone. Mom keeps telling them I fell by myself, but I didn't, Daddy. I promise I didn't. Cole closed his eyes, his breathing controlled, but his knuckles white around the phone. I believe you, sweetheart. Daddy believes every word you're saying. Major Valdez leaned closer, understanding the gravity of what they were hearing. A child had been abused, and one of his best soldiers was about to request emergency leave. More than that, Valdez recognized the look in Cole's eyes. He had seen it before, during a mission when they had discovered a Taliban cell using children as human shields. It was the look of a man who had reached his moral event horizon. Sophie, I need you to be brave for Daddy just a little longer. I'm coming home, and when I get there, we're going to make sure no one ever hurts you again. Do you understand me? Sophie nodded vigorously, wincing at the pain the movement caused. When will you be here? Very soon, baby girl. You focus on getting better, and let the doctors and nurses take care of you. Don't worry about anything else. The call ended, and Cole sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the now dark screen. Major Valdez waited, understanding that his friend was processing information and formulating a response. When Cole finally spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. I need emergency leave, sir. My daughter has been assaulted by my wife's lover, and she needs her father. Done, Valdez replied without hesitation. I'll have you on the next transport to Ramstein, then direct to Dover. You'll be stateside in 18 hours. Cole nodded, then stood and began methodically packing his personal effects. His movements were precise and purposeful, but Valdez noticed that Cole was packing items that wouldn't normally accompany a soldier on emergency leave, certain tools and equipment that suggested Cole's plans extended beyond simply comforting his injured daughter. Cole, Valdez said carefully, whatever you're thinking about doing when you get home, remember that you're still subject to military justice. Don't let anger make you do something that destroys your future. Cole paused in his packing and met his commanding officer's gaze. Sir, with all due respect, my future was determined the moment that man put his hands on my daughter. I'm not going home to lose my temper or make rash decisions. I'm going home to solve a problem. The distinction was subtle but significant. Valdez had heard Cole use that exact phrase before, during mission briefings when they were discussing how to neutralize high-value targets. It wasn't anger speaking. It was something far more dangerous. As Cole finished packing, he retrieved a small notebook from his footlocker and began writing. Valdez glimpsed enough to understand that Cole was documenting everything Sophie had told him, creating a detailed timeline of events. This wasn't the behavior of a man planning to act on emotion. This was the methodical preparation of someone planning a campaign. "I'll need copies of all communication logs for the past 6 months," Cole said, his tone businesslike. "Phone records, video call transcripts, anything that might be relevant to establishing patterns of behavior." Valdez realized that Cole was already thinking like an investigator, building a case rather than simply reacting to injury. It was impressive and deeply concerning in equal measure. The transport helicopter arrived within 2 hours, and Cole boarded with minimal ceremony. As the aircraft lifted off, carrying him away from the war zone he had called home for the past year, Cole stared out at the Afghan landscape and felt something shift inside him. He had spent years fighting foreign enemies in defense of American values and freedoms. Now he was returning home to fight a different kind of war, one where the enemy had infiltrated his most sacred ground. During the long flight to Germany, Cole used the time to research everything he could find about Troy Hendricks. Military networks provided access to background check databases, and Cole systematically compiled information about his target. What he discovered only deepened his resolve. Troy's employment history showed a pattern of short-term positions, each ending with vague references to policy violations or inappropriate conduct. There were no criminal charges, but the circumstantial evidence painted a picture of a man who specialized in exploiting vulnerable families. Cole found 3 previous instances where Troy had been involved with military wives during deployment periods, each relationship ending when the husband returned home. But this time was different. This time, Troy had crossed a line that Cole considered unforgivable. He had hurt a child. Not just any child, but Cole's child, the most precious thing in his universe. The man who had spent years perfecting the art of neutralizing threats had finally found an enemy worthy of his complete attention. As the transport plane crossed into European airspace, Cole closed his eyes and began planning. He wasn't returning home as the man who had left. He was returning as something altogether more dangerous. Troy Hendricks had made the mistake of underestimating what a father would do to protect his child, and Amy had chosen to betray the one person who would have died for her without question. They were about to learn that some betrayals carry consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment of treachery. Cole Brennan was coming home, and he was bringing with him every skill he had learned in 6 years of warfare. The only difference was that this time, the battlefield would be domestic, and the rules of engagement would be entirely of his own making. Chapter 3: The Reconnaissance. The flight from Dover Air Force Base to Louisville seemed to pass in slow motion, each mile bringing Cole closer to a confrontation that had been brewing since the moment Sophie spoke those devastating words. He had used the travel time to continue his research, building a comprehensive profile of Troy Hendricks that revealed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning nearly a decade. Military databases had provided access to criminal background checks, employment records, and even social media activity that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Troy had moved from city to city, always targeting communities with high military populations. His method was consistent. Establish himself in a trusted position working with families, identify vulnerable wives dealing with deployment stress, then systematically exploit their loneliness and frustration. Cole discovered that Troy's departure from his previous position in Tennessee hadn't been voluntary. A military wife named Crystal Valdez, no relation to his commanding officer, had filed a complaint alleging that Troy had manipulated her into an affair during her husband's deployment, then became increasingly controlling and possessive. When her husband returned unexpectedly due to a training injury, Troy had threatened to destroy her marriage unless she left her family and moved away with him. Crystal had contacted authorities, but Troy had disappeared before any formal charges could be filed. The pattern was becoming clear, and Cole realized that Amy wasn't Troy's first victim. She was simply his most recent mark. What made this situation different was Sophie's presence and Troy's willingness to use violence against a child to maintain control. That escalation represented a line crossing that Cole found unforgivable. During his layover in Chicago, Cole made several phone calls using encrypted military communication protocols. The first was to his old friend Danny Rodriguez, who had left the service 2 years earlier and now worked as a private investigator in Louisville. Danny owed Cole his life after Cole had carried him 2 miles through hostile territory following an IED explosion, and their bond had only strengthened over the years. "Jesus, Cole, I heard about Sophie through the base network." Danny's voice was tight with anger. "How bad is it?" Cole provided a clinical summary of Sophie's injuries and the circumstances surrounding them, watching Danny's expression darken through the video connection. Danny had children of his own and understood the depth of Cole's rage. "What do you need from me?" Danny asked without hesitation. "Everything you can find on Troy Hendricks and his relationship with my wife. Financial records, communication logs, surveillance footage from around my house. I want to know every detail of how this happened and who else might be involved." Danny nodded, already taking notes. "I've got contacts at Louisville Metro who can access traffic camera footage and cell tower data. Give me 24 hours, and I'll have a complete timeline of their affair." Cole's second call was to his lawyer, Frank Peterson, who specialized in military family law and had helped several of Cole's fellow soldiers navigate difficult divorces. Frank's reputation for aggressive advocacy had made him popular among service members who needed someone willing to fight for their rights. "Cole, I've been expecting your call since I heard about Sophie," Frank said. "First things first, we need to establish temporary custody and get a protection order in place. Sophie's testimony about the assault gives us grounds for immediate action. What about Amy's role in covering this up?" Cole asked. Frank was quiet for a moment. "That's complicated. If we can prove she knew about the abuse and failed to protect Sophie, we might have grounds for charges of child endangerment. But prosecution would depend on the district attorney's willingness to pursue the case." Cole's third call was the most difficult. He contacted his mother, Martha, who had been caring for her elderly sister in eastern Kentucky and was unaware of the crisis. Martha's voice cracked as Cole explained what had happened to her granddaughter. "That bastard hurt Sophie." Martha's accent thickened with emotion. "Cole, you know I've never interfered in your marriage, but I always had a bad feeling about that girl. She was too good at playing innocent while looking for something better." Martha's assessment of Amy had always been harsh, based on her observation that Amy seemed to view Cole's military service as a temporary inconvenience rather than an honorable calling. Martha had noticed Amy's reluctance to embrace military life and her tendency to complain about sacrifices that other military wives accepted without question. "I'm coming up to help with Sophie," Martha announced. "That child needs family around her who'll put her first." Cole's final preparation involved a stop at a 24-hour sporting goods store near the airport, where he used his military ID to purchase several items that would be useful for surveillance and information gathering. His selections were careful and deliberate: night vision equipment, high-quality cameras with telephoto lenses, and electronic devices that would allow him to monitor communications. The drive from Louisville to Fort Campbell took 90 minutes, giving Cole time to process the intelligence Danny had already begun providing through encrypted messages. Surveillance footage from traffic cameras showed Troy's vehicle at Cole's house on dozens of occasions over the past 3 months, often arriving shortly after Amy left for work and remaining for hours. Cell phone records revealed a pattern of constant communication between Amy and Troy, including late-night calls that lasted for hours and text message exchanges that numbered in the hundreds per week. Most damning were the timestamps showing that Amy and Troy had been in contact within hours of Sophie's accident, coordinating their story before emergency responders arrived. Cole arrived at Fort Campbell just after midnight, the base familiar, yet somehow different now that he understood what had been happening in his absence. The family housing unit that had once represented his American dream now felt contaminated by betrayal and violence. He parked several blocks away and approached on foot, using skills learned in urban warfare to remain undetected. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room, and Troy's BMW was parked in the driveway where Cole's own vehicle should have been. The symbolism was not lost on him. Another man had taken his place in every aspect of his life. Cole spent 2 hours conducting surveillance, documenting the layout of the property and noting security vulnerabilities. Troy had grown comfortable in his position, making no effort to conceal his presence or maintain operational security. The man's arrogance would be useful in the coming confrontation. At 0300 hours, Cole made his approach to the house, using lockpicking skills learned during specialized training to gain entry through the back door. The silence of the house was broken only by the sound of two people sleeping in what had once been Cole's bedroom. He moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, noting changes Amy had made during his absence. Family photos that had once included Cole had been replaced or turned face down. Sophie's artwork from school no longer covered the refrigerator, and her favorite toys were scattered carelessly around the living room instead of being properly organized in her bedroom. The house felt like a crime scene where his family's life had been methodically erased. In Sophie's bedroom, Cole found evidence of the confrontation that had sent his daughter to the hospital. Scratches on the hardwood floor showed where furniture had been moved, and a small bloodstain on the carpet near the stairs had been inadequately cleaned. Troy's attempt to cover up evidence of the assault only deepened Cole's resolve. Cole spent another hour collecting evidence and documenting the scene before withdrawing to his observation post. As dawn approached, he watched Troy emerge from the master bedroom and move around the house with casual familiarity. The man was tall and well-built, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who believed he had successfully eliminated all threats to his position. Amy appeared an hour later, and Cole studied his wife's behavior with clinical detachment. She moved with nervous energy, constantly checking her phone and looking toward the windows as if expecting unwelcome visitors. Her body language suggested guilt and anxiety, but whether from remorse over Sophie's injury or fear of consequences remained unclear. When Amy and Troy left for the hospital to visit Sophie, Cole followed at a discreet distance, documenting their route and timing. He needed to understand their routine before making his next move. At the hospital, he observed them from the parking garage, noting that they held hands until just before entering the building, then separated to maintain the illusion of appropriate boundaries. The sight of Troy walking freely into the hospital where his injured daughter lay recovering triggered something primal in Cole's chest. The man responsible for Sophie's pain was playing the role of concerned family friend, manipulating medical staff and social workers with the same practiced charm he had used to seduce Amy. Cole returned to his surveillance position and began making final preparations for the confrontation that would define the rest of their lives. He understood that the next 24 hours would require precision, patience, and absolutely ruthless execution. There would be no room for mercy or second chances. Troy Hendricks had made the mistake of believing that a deployed soldier was a powerless soldier. Amy had chosen to believe that distance and time had weakened her husband's claim on his family. They were about to learn that Cole Brennan was not the kind of man who simply accepted betrayal and abuse of his child. The reconnaissance phase was complete. Tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest, and Cole intended to prosecute it with every skill he had learned in service to his country. The only difference was that this time, he was fighting for something infinitely more precious than geopolitical objectives. He was fighting for his daughter's safety and his family's honor. And in that fight, Cole Brennan had never known defeat. Chapter 4. The Approach. Cole established his command post in a rental house 3 miles from base housing, paying cash for a month-long lease through a property management company that didn't require extensive documentation. The modest 2-bedroom home provided perfect line-of-sight surveillance of his target area while offering multiple exit routes and secure storage for his equipment. Danny Rodriguez arrived at dawn with 2 SUVs full of surveillance gear and intelligence reports that painted an even more damning picture of Troy and Amy's betrayal. Danny had spent the night compiling phone records, financial statements, and witness testimony that revealed the scope of their deception. "Your wife cleaned out the joint savings account 2 weeks ago," Danny reported, spreading documents across the dining room table that Cole had converted into an operations center. $43,000 transferred to a new account with both her and Troy's names on it. They also applied for a lease on a house in Tennessee, with move-in scheduled for next month. Cole studied the bank records with the same analytical approach he applied to intelligence briefings. The pattern of withdrawals showed systematic planning rather than impulsive spending. Amy and Troy had been preparing to disappear together, presumably planning to take Sophie with them and present Cole with a fait accompli upon his return. "There's more," Danny continued, producing a series of photographs taken with telephoto lenses. "Troy's been meeting regularly with a woman named Patricia Mills, who works for Kentucky Child Services. Look at these timestamps. Every meeting occurred within 24 hours of Amy calling in concerns about Sophie's behavior. The photographs showed Troy and Patricia sharing intimate dinners at upscale restaurants, their body language suggesting a relationship that extended beyond professional consultation. Cole realized that Troy had been building a case against him as an absent father while simultaneously positioning himself as Sophie's more suitable guardian. "They've been documenting everything," Cole said, his voice deadly calm. "Amy's calls to child services, Sophie's behavioral issues following my deployments, even teacher conferences where I couldn't be present. They're building a custody case." Danny nodded grimly. "Patricia Mills has a history of aggressive intervention in military families. 3 deployments in the past 2 years. She's recommended removal of children from homes where fathers were overseas for extended periods. She's built her career on the argument that military families are inherently unstable." Cole felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Troy hadn't simply seduced a lonely military wife. He had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign to eliminate Cole from his daughter's life permanently. The assault on Sophie hadn't been a momentary loss of control. It had been part of a calculated strategy to force compliance from a child who represented the last obstacle to Troy's complete victory. "What about local law enforcement?" Cole asked. "I've got friends in Louisville Metro who are willing to listen, but they're constrained by jurisdictional issues since the incident occurred on base," Danny replied. "Military police are investigating, but their focus is on the assault charges. They don't have the full picture of the conspiracy angle." Cole spent the next 6 hours studying surveillance footage and communication records, building a detailed understanding of Troy and Amy's operational patterns. They maintained a careful facade of propriety in public while behaving like an established couple in private. Troy had effectively moved into Cole's home, taking over not just his wife and bedroom, but his role as household authority figure. Sophie's medical records, obtained through Frank Peterson's legal channels, revealed the true extent of her injuries and the inconsistencies in the story Amy and Troy had provided. Emergency room physicians had documented bruising patterns on Sophie's arm that were consistent with adult grip marks, contradicting claims that she had simply fallen. Social workers had flagged the case for further investigation, but Troy's relationship with Patricia Mills had somehow slowed the process. As evening approached, Cole received a secure message from Major Valdez containing information that changed everything. Military intelligence had been conducting routine background checks on civilian contractors and had discovered that Troy Hendricks was not his real name. The man Amy had been involved with was actually Troy Matthews, who had abandoned his real identity after being connected to a child abuse investigation in Colorado 3 years earlier. "Son of a bitch has been living under an assumed identity," Cole muttered, studying the criminal history report Valdez had forwarded. Troy Matthews had been investigated for inappropriate conduct with minors while working as a youth sports coach, but charges had been dropped when key witnesses received anonymous threats and refused to testify. The revelation elevated the situation from adultery and child abuse to something approaching organized criminal activity. Troy had constructed an entirely false identity to avoid prosecution for previous crimes, then used that identity to gain access to military families through his contractor position. Amy had unknowingly become involved with a predator who represented a clear and ongoing threat to children. Cole's phone buzzed with an incoming call from the hospital. Sophie's voice was weak but determined as she spoke. "Daddy, when are you coming to see me? Mom keeps saying you're still deployed, but I know you're here. The nurses told me you called." Cole's heart clenched as he realized Amy was continuing to manipulate their daughter even as Sophie lay injured in a hospital bed. "I'm here, sweetheart. Daddy's in Kentucky, and I'm going to see you very soon. But first, I need to take care of some things to make sure you're safe. Troy told Mom that you might try to take me away from them," Sophie whispered. "He said if that happened, they would have to disappear where you couldn't find us." "Daddy, I don't want to disappear. I want to come home with you." The conversation confirmed Cole's worst fears. Troy and Amy were planning to abduct Sophie and disappear into whatever identity Troy had prepared as an escape route. Sophie's resistance to calling Troy father hadn't just triggered violence. It had accelerated their timeline for removing her from Cole's reach permanently. "Sophie, listen very carefully," Cole said, his voice gentle but urgent. "Tomorrow, you're going to see Grandma Martha. She's coming to stay with you while Daddy handles some business. No matter what anyone tells you, you stay with Grandma and don't go anywhere with Mom or Troy until Daddy says it's okay. Can you remember that? Yes, Daddy. But what about Mom? She seems really scared lately. Cole closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. Mom made some bad choices, sweetheart. Sometimes when adults make bad choices, other adults have to step in to keep children safe. Daddy's going to make sure you're safe, no matter what. After ending the call, Cole spent another hour refining his operational plan. The next phase would require precise timing and coordination with multiple agencies to ensure that Troy couldn't escape justice through another identity change. Cole had to move carefully. One mistake would allow Troy to disappear completely, potentially taking Sophie with him. Danny had arranged for additional surveillance support from his network of former military personnel who now worked in private security. By midnight, Cole had a complete picture of Troy's daily routine, his known associates, and the locations where he felt most comfortable and vulnerable. The plan that emerged was complex but comprehensive. Cole would simultaneously address the immediate threat to Sophie, gather evidence for criminal prosecution, and ensure that both Troy and Amy faced consequences for their betrayal and abuse. It would require Cole to operate in legal gray areas, using skills and resources that pushed the boundaries of civilian law enforcement. But as Cole stared at photographs of his injured daughter and read transcripts of Amy's lies to child services, he felt no moral ambiguity about what was coming. Troy Matthews had declared war on Cole's family through deception, manipulation, and violence against a child. Amy had chosen to become Troy's accomplice rather than protect her own daughter. Now they would both learn what happened when that war was brought to someone trained to win at any cost. Cole Brennan had spent 6 years learning to neutralize enemies who threatened American families. Tomorrow, he would apply those same skills to protect his own family from enemies who had infiltrated his home. The approach phase was complete. Cole had gathered intelligence, positioned resources, and prepared for decisive action. All that remained was the execution of a plan that would restore his daughter's safety and deliver justice to those who had betrayed his trust. Troy Matthews and Amy Brennan had made the mistake of believing that distance and time had made them safe from consequences. They were about to discover that some betrayals carry prices that can never be escaped, and some fathers will travel any distance to protect their children from harm. Chapter 5: The Engagement. Dawn broke gray and cold as Cole prepared for the day that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives. He dressed in dark civilian clothes and checked his equipment one final time: surveillance gear, recording devices, and tools that would be necessary for what was coming. His movements were methodical and calm, the product of years spent preparing for operations where failure meant death. Martha Brennan arrived at the hospital at 0800 hours, exactly as Cole had instructed. His mother's presence served multiple purposes, providing Sophie with family support, creating a witness to Amy's behavior, and establishing legal grounds for Cole to petition for emergency custody. Martha's reputation in the community as a respected woman who had raised her son alone would carry weight with authorities. Cole monitored the hospital through Danny's surveillance network, watching as Martha entered Sophie's room, and Amy's demeanor immediately shifted to defensive hostility. The conversation between the two women was brief and tense, with Amy clearly uncomfortable having her mother-in-law present during this crisis. "Amy's nervous," Danny reported through radio communication. "She keeps checking her phone and looking toward the door like she's expecting someone." Cole wasn't surprised. Troy's absence from the hospital that morning was intentional. He was at Cole's house, gathering belongings and preparing for what they believed would be their final departure from Kentucky. Cole's intelligence indicated that Troy had booked flights to Tennessee for that evening, with a rental car reserved for the drive to Louisville International Airport. At 0930 hours, Cole received confirmation that Phase 1 of his operation was complete. Frank Peterson had successfully filed emergency custody papers with the family court, citing Sophie's hospital testimony and medical evidence of abuse. The petition included a request for immediate protective orders against Troy Matthews, using his real identity and criminal history that military intelligence had provided. The judge granted temporary custody, Frank reported via secure phone. "Sophie is now legally under your protection, and law enforcement has been notified that Troy Matthews is wanted for questioning in connection with child abuse charges." Cole felt a moment of satisfaction as the first domino fell. Troy's carefully constructed false identity was now compromised, and his access to Sophie had been legally severed. But the man was dangerous and would likely become more so once he realized his position had been exposed. Phase 2 required more delicate execution. Cole needed to gather additional evidence of Troy and Amy's conspiracy while positioning himself for direct confrontation. He approached his former home using skills learned in urban warfare, moving through neighbors' yards and using natural cover to remain undetected. From his observation position behind the garage, Cole watched Troy move through the house with increasing urgency. The man was clearly following a predetermined evacuation plan, collecting specific items and documents while leaving behind anything that might slow his escape. Troy's behavior confirmed Cole's assessment that this had been planned as a complete disappearance rather than a simple relocation. At 1030 hours, Amy returned from the hospital in a state of obvious agitation. Cole watched through telephoto lenses as she and Troy engaged in an intense conversation that quickly escalated to argument. Amy's body language suggested fear and reluctance, while Troy's gestures became increasingly aggressive and controlling. Cole activated recording equipment that would capture audio from the house's interior, technology that Danny had obtained through private security channels. The conversation that emerged confirmed many of Cole's suspicions about the true nature of Amy and Troy's relationship. "Told you this would happen if we moved too fast." Amy's voice was sharp with panic. "Martha showing up at the hospital means Cole knows something. We should have waited until Sophie was discharged." Troy's response was cold and calculating. "Cole's still overseas, and by the time he gets back, we'll be gone. Sophie will adjust to calling me father once she understands there's no choice." "She's hurt, Troy. Maybe we should reconsider." The kid fell downstairs because she was being defiant. That's what happens when children don't respect authority. Once we're settled in Tennessee, she'll learn proper behavior. Cole's hands tightened around the recording equipment as Troy continued speaking, his tone growing more menacing. "You've got two choices, Amy. Come with me now, or explain to Child Services why you allowed your daughter to be injured while you were fucking another man. Patricia Mills will make sure you lose custody either way, but at least with me, you'll have a future." The conversation revealed the full scope of Troy's manipulation. He had systematically isolated Amy from her support systems, compromised her relationship with her daughter, and created a situation where she felt trapped into compliance with his demands. Amy had become another victim of Troy's predatory behavior, though her willingness to prioritize her own interests over Sophie's safety still constituted unforgivable betrayal in Cole's mind. At 1145 hours, Cole's surveillance detected movement that changed the operational picture dramatically. A Kentucky State Police cruiser pulled into the driveway, followed by a Child Services vehicle. Patricia Mills emerged from the sedan, accompanied by two social workers Cole didn't recognize. The arrival of authorities should have represented positive development, but Cole's intelligence suggested otherwise. Patricia Mills' relationship with Troy meant that this visit was likely coordinated to remove Sophie from the hospital and place her in Troy's custody before Cole could intervene. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Cole immediately activated emergency protocols, contacting Frank Peterson and Major Valdez simultaneously. "They're making their move," he reported. "Mills is at my house with state police backup. This is the custody grab we anticipated." Frank's response was swift. "I'm en route to the hospital with federal marshals. Military family law supersedes state authority in this case, and we have evidence that Mills is compromised. Sophie won't be going anywhere." Cole realized that the next few hours would determine whether his family's future was decided by law and evidence or by force and deception. Troy had revealed himself as someone willing to use violence against children and manipulation of government agencies to achieve his goals. Such a person would not surrender simply because legal documents had been filed. The confrontation Cole had been planning was about to become inevitable. Troy would soon discover that his false identity had been exposed, his criminal history had been revealed, and his access to Sophie had been legally terminated. His response would likely be desperate and dangerous. Cole checked his equipment one final time and began moving toward the house. 6 years of military training had prepared him for this moment. Not the specific circumstances, but the psychological and tactical requirements of engaging an enemy who threatened everything he held sacred. Troy Matthews had made a career of exploiting vulnerable families and escaping consequences through deception and intimidation. He had underestimated the resolve of a father who had dedicated his life to protecting the innocent and destroying those who preyed upon them. The engagement phase was beginning, and Cole Brennan intended to prosecute this battle with every skill he possessed. Troy and Amy were about to learn that some betrayals carried prices that could only be paid through complete destruction of the life they had tried to build on the ruins of Cole's family. The war for Sophie's safety and Cole's family honor was about to reach its decisive moment, and Cole had no intention of allowing his enemies to escape with anything resembling victory. Chapter 6: The Confrontation. Cole approached his house with the methodical precision of a special operations soldier advancing on a high-value target. Every step was calculated, every angle of approach considered for maximum tactical advantage. The presence of state police complicated the situation but didn't change his ultimate objective: protecting Sophie and neutralizing the threat Troy represented. Through his earpiece, Cole received updates from Frank Peterson at the hospital. Federal marshals have secured Sophie's room. Mills and her team were denied access, and she's demanding to speak with you immediately. Something's got her spooked. The timing confirmed Cole's suspicions that Patricia Mills and Troy had coordinated their actions to remove Sophie from protective custody before Cole could intervene. Now that their plan had been disrupted, both would likely become increasingly desperate and unpredictable. From his concealed position, Cole observed the interaction between Troy, Amy, and the authorities at his front door. Patricia Mills appeared to be explaining something to the state police officers while Troy maintained a facade of concerned family friend. Amy stood to one side, her body language suggesting she wanted to be anywhere else. Cole activated his recording equipment as voices became audible from the porch. Mr. Hendricks has been serving as a father figure to the child during her father's deployment, Patricia Mills was explaining to the officers. Given the girl's recent behavioral issues and the circumstances of her injury, we believe temporary placement with Mr. Hendricks would be in her best interest. Troy nodded gravely, playing his role perfectly. Sophie has been struggling with abandonment issues related to her father's extended absences. Amy and I have been providing stability during a difficult time. Cole felt his jaw tighten as he listened to Troy manipulate trained professionals with practiced lies. The man's ability to present himself as a caring authority figure while concealing his true predatory nature was both impressive and infuriating. The lead state police officer, a sergeant named Williams according to his name tag, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Ma'am, we've got conflicting paperwork here. Federal custody order says the child stays where she is, but you're saying state jurisdiction applies." Patricia Mills' response revealed the extent of her corruption. The federal order is based on incomplete information provided by an absent father who has no direct knowledge of the current situation. Military deployment doesn't supersede child welfare concerns. Cole had heard enough. He keyed his radio and spoke quietly to Danny. "Initiate Phase 3. I'm going in." Phase 3 involved the simultaneous release of Troy's true identity and criminal history to multiple law enforcement agencies, accompanied by evidence of his conspiracy with Patricia Mills. Danny had prepared packages containing photographs, financial records, and communication logs that would be delivered to state police internal affairs, the FBI, and military criminal investigation units within minutes. Cole emerged from concealment and walked openly toward his house, his approach calculated to appear non-threatening while positioning himself for maximum tactical advantage. The police officers noticed him first, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons until they recognized the military bearing and confident approach that suggested authority rather than threat. "Afternoon, officers," Cole said, producing his military identification and emergency leave orders. "Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan. I believe you're here about my daughter." The reaction from Troy was immediate and telling. His carefully maintained composure cracked as he realized that Cole had somehow returned without warning. Amy gasped audibly, her face draining of color as she understood that the confrontation she had been dreading was about to occur. Patricia Mills attempted to maintain control of the situation. "Sergeant Brennan, we were just discussing temporary care arrangements for Sophie while you transitioned back from deployment. Mr. Hendricks has been—" "Mr. Hendricks," Cole interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 6 years commanding men in combat, whose real name is Troy Matthews, is wanted for questioning in connection with child abuse charges filed this morning. He's also the subject of a federal investigation for identity fraud and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The effect of Cole's words was electric. Sergeant Williams immediately stepped closer to Troy, hand now resting openly on his weapon. The other officers spread out to control the scene, while Patricia Mills sputtered protests about jurisdictional authority. Troy's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath the carefully constructed facade. You think you can just show up and destroy what we've built here? Amy chose me, soldier boy. Your daughter was learning to respect proper authority until you poisoned her mind against me. Cole's response was delivered with glacial calm. My daughter is 8 years old. The only thing she needed to learn was that adults who claim to care about her don't push her downstairs when she refuses to call them daddy. Amy found her voice, stepping forward with tears streaming down her face. Cole, you don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Sophie fell and Sophie told me exactly what happened. Cole cut her off. In detail, with witnesses present. She said Troy forced her to call him dad, and when she refused, he grabbed her arm and pushed her down the stairs. Would you like to hear the recording? The admission that Cole possessed Sophie's testimony sent visible shock waves through the group. Troy's face darkened with rage as he realized his carefully constructed story had been compromised by the very child he had tried to intimidate into silence. That little bitch is lying, Troy snarled, abandoning any pretense of civility. She's been nothing but trouble since day one, disrespecting me and undermining my authority. She needed to learn consequences. The words hung in the air like a confession, recorded by multiple devices and witnessed by sworn law enforcement officers. Troy had just admitted to deliberately harming a child as punishment for disobedience, destroying any remaining credibility he might have possessed. Sergeant Williams stepped forward, hand now on his handcuffs. Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspected child abuse. Troy's reaction was swift and violent. Instead of complying, he lunged toward Amy, grabbing her arm and attempting to use her as a human shield. Back off. Amy comes with me, or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother abandons her child for another man. Cole moved without conscious thought, 6 years of combat training taking over as he assessed the threat and responded with lethal efficiency. He closed the distance to Troy in 3 quick steps, striking the man's wrist with precise force that caused him to release Amy, while simultaneously positioning himself between Troy and any potential escape route. Touch her again, Cole said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, and I'll show you exactly what I learned doing house-to-house clearing operations in Afghanistan. Troy was larger than Cole, but the military training and psychological conditioning created an imbalance that was immediately apparent to everyone present. Troy carried himself like someone accustomed to intimidating civilians. Cole moved with the controlled violence of a professional soldier who had killed enemies in combat and felt no moral ambiguity about doing so again when necessary. The state police officers quickly separated the two men, but not before Troy made one final mistake that sealed his fate completely. As he was being handcuffed, he turned to Amy with venomous rage. You think he'll forgive you? You think he'll take you back after what we did in his bed every night while he was gone? He's going to throw you away like garbage, and you'll have nothing left. Amy's sobs grew louder as Troy's words destroyed any remaining possibility of reconciliation with Cole. The crude revelation of intimate details served no purpose except to inflict maximum emotional damage on everyone present. It demonstrated that Troy's motivations had never been love or even desire. They had been conquest and destruction of Cole's family for its own sake. Cole looked at Amy with the detached assessment of a soldier evaluating collateral damage. The woman he had married and loved was still there, but she had made choices that placed her in the enemy camp. Her tears and apparent remorse didn't change the fundamental reality that she had chosen Troy over her own daughter's safety. Officers, Cole said, his voice returning to professional calm. I believe you'll find that Ms. Mills also has some explaining to do regarding her relationship with the suspect and her attempts to circumvent federal custody orders. Patricia Mills had been attempting to fade into the background during the confrontation, But Cole's words brought unwanted attention back to her role in the conspiracy. Sergeant Williams looked at her with new skepticism as he considered the implications of coordinated corruption. As Troy was loaded into the police cruiser, he made eye contact with Cole through the window. The look that passed between them was electric with mutual recognition. Two predators acknowledging each other across the artificial constraints of civilization. Troy understood that he had underestimated his opponent catastrophically, while Cole understood that legal justice might not be sufficient to ensure his family's permanent safety. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Cole realized that the confrontation was far from over. Troy would likely make bail, Patricia Mills would attempt to cover her tracks, and Amy would need to face consequences for her role in endangering Sophie. The legal system would handle some aspects of justice, but Cole had learned that some problems required more direct solutions. As the police vehicles departed with their prisoners, Cole stood in the driveway of the house that had once represented his American dream. The physical structure remained, but everything it had symbolized had been destroyed by betrayal and violence. Now it was just a piece of real estate in a larger battlefield where the war for his family's future would continue to be fought. The confrontation phase was complete, but Cole understood that victory required more than simply removing immediate threats. Troy Matthews had revealed himself as someone who would never stop hunting what he considered his property, and Amy had demonstrated that her loyalty could not be trusted when tested. Complete security for Sophie would require more permanent solutions. Cole Brennan had spent 6 years learning to eliminate threats to American families. Now he would apply those same skills to protect his own family, regardless of what legal or moral boundaries he might need to cross. Some enemies could only be stopped through total destruction, and Cole was prepared to deliver exactly that level of justice. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed once federal authorities took control of the case. Troy's fingerprints confirmed his real identity as Troy Matthews, wanted in 3 states for crimes ranging from identity fraud to child endangerment. His carefully constructed false persona collapsed under scrutiny, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior spanning over a decade. Patricia Mills fared little better. FBI investigation revealed financial payments from Troy totaling nearly $15,000 over 6 months, along with evidence that she had deliberately delayed investigations into multiple military families to benefit Troy's manipulation schemes. Her corruption had enabled Troy to target vulnerable wives and children while their protectors served overseas. Cole spent the morning at Fort Campbell's legal offices, working with Frank Peterson to finalize custody arrangements and coordinate with military criminal investigators. Sophie's testimony had been recorded under controlled conditions, providing prosecutors with devastating evidence of Troy's violence and manipulation tactics. The DA is talking about a plea bargain, Frank reported during their consultation. Troy's lawyer wants to negotiate down to simple assault in exchange for information about other victims. Cole's response was immediate and non-negotiable. No deals. Sophie deserves justice, and every other family he's destroyed deserves to see him face full consequences for his actions. Frank nodded, understanding Cole's position. The evidence is strong enough that we don't need his cooperation. Multiple victims from previous locations have come forward now that his real identity is public. He's looking at serious federal time, even without the Kentucky charges. But Cole knew that legal justice, while satisfying, wouldn't address the deeper problem. Troy had demonstrated that he viewed Sophie as property to be reclaimed and Amy as a possession to be controlled. Even from prison, such a man might find ways to continue threatening Cole's family through associates or hired surrogates. Amy's situation was more complex and personally devastating. She had been released pending investigation into charges of child endangerment and conspiracy. Her role in covering up Sophie's abuse and planning to flee with Troy made her legally culpable, but her status as another of Troy's victims complicated prosecution decisions. Cole found Amy sitting in her car outside the base legal offices, clearly waiting for him to emerge. Her appearance shocked him. She looked like she had aged years in the past few days, her face drawn and her eyes haunted by the magnitude of what she had lost. "Cole, please," she said as he approached. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes." Against his better judgment, Cole agreed to hear what she had to say. They drove to a quiet park near the base, a place where they had brought Sophie for picnics during happier times. The irony of the location wasn't lost on either of them. "I know you'll never forgive me," Amy began, her voice thick with tears. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to understand that I never meant for Sophie to get hurt. I was lonely and confused, and Troy made me feel like someone special again." Cole listened without interruption as Amy described Troy's manipulation tactics, how he had gradually isolated her from friends, convinced her that Cole's military service demonstrated his lack of commitment to family, and painted himself as the solution to all her problems. Her account matched profiles of domestic abuse victims, but Cole felt no sympathy for someone who had chosen her own emotional needs over her child's safety. "He said you were planning to leave the military and take Sophie away from me," Amy continued. "He convinced me that I had to choose between losing both of you or building a new life where Sophie could have a real father who was actually present." The revelation that Troy had used Cole's own plans for transitioning to civilian life as a weapon against his family added another layer to the betrayal. Amy had known about Cole's intention to leave the service for a detective position that would keep him home, but Troy had twisted that information into evidence of Cole's unreliability. "Sophie never liked him," Amy admitted. "She always said something felt wrong about Troy, but I thought she was just being difficult about accepting change. When she refused to call him Dad, I should have listened to her instincts instead of supporting his authority." Cole finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "You supported his authority when he demanded respect from our daughter. You covered for him when he hurt her badly enough to require hospitalization. You planned to disappear with him and take Sophie away from the only family she's ever known. Which part of that should I understand as anything other than betrayal?" Amy flinched at the clinical assessment, but didn't attempt to defend her actions. "I was afraid of him by the end. He became controlling and possessive, demanding to know where I was every minute. When Sophie got hurt, I was terrified of what he might do if I didn't support his story." The admission that Amy had been operating under fear explained some of her behavior, but didn't excuse the fundamental choice to prioritize her own safety over her daughter's welfare. Cole had spent years in situations where fear was constant, but he had never allowed it to compromise his duty to protect others. "What happens now?" Amy asked quietly. Cole considered his response carefully. The woman sitting beside him was still legally his wife and Sophie's mother, but those relationships had been fundamentally altered by her choices. Trust, once broken by betrayal of this magnitude, could never be fully restored. "You'll face whatever legal consequences the district attorney decides are appropriate," Cole said. "Sophie will live with me, and you'll have supervised visitation rights until a family court determines what's in her best interest. Beyond that, I don't know." Amy nodded, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the magnitude of what her choices had cost. "Will you tell Sophie that I'm sorry? That I love her and never meant for any of this to happen?" "I'll tell her that you made mistakes that hurt people you claim to love," Cole replied. "Sophie's old enough to understand that adults sometimes make bad choices that have serious consequences. What I won't do is make excuses for those choices or pretend they were anything other than betrayal." Their conversation was interrupted by Cole's phone buzzing with an urgent message from Danny Rodriguez. The text was brief but alarming. "Troy made bail. Armed associates seen near Sophie's hospital. Recommend immediate tactical response." Cole's blood went cold as he realized that Troy's network was more extensive than they had anticipated. The man had resources and connections that allowed him to coordinate retaliation even from custody. Sophie was still vulnerable, and Cole's careful legal maneuvering might not be sufficient to protect her. "I have to go," Cole said, already moving toward his vehicle. "Stay away from Sophie until this is resolved. If Troy or anyone associated with him contacts you, call the police immediately." Amy grabbed his arm as he started to leave. "Cole, what's happening? Is Sophie in danger?" Cole looked at her with the cold assessment of a soldier preparing for combat. "Sophie has been in danger since the day you brought Troy into our home. The difference now is that I'm here to eliminate that danger permanently." The drive to the hospital took 12 minutes through heavy traffic, during which Cole coordinated with Danny's surveillance team and federal marshals who were converging on the medical center. Troy's bail had been posted by someone using cash and false identification, suggesting a level of organization that transformed the situation from domestic dispute to potential organized criminal activity. Cole arrived to find the hospital under discreet security lockdown, with armed federal agents positioned at strategic points throughout the building. Sophie's room was under direct protection, but Cole knew that determined enemies could find ways to bypass even professional security measures. Danny met him in the parking garage with a tactical assessment that confirmed Cole's worst fears. 2 vehicles with out-of-state plates have been conducting surveillance for the past hour. Occupants match descriptions of known associates from Troy's previous locations. This isn't random. It's coordinated retaliation. Cole felt the familiar sensation of transitioning from civilian to combat mindset. The rules of engagement were different here, but the objective remained the same. Protect the innocent and neutralize threats through whatever means necessary. Martha's with Sophie, and both are secure, Danny continued. But federal marshals think this might be a probing action to test our response. The real assault could come later when we're less prepared. Cole realized that Troy's arrest had only escalated the danger rather than eliminating it. The man had revealed the existence of a criminal network dedicated to exploiting military families, and Cole's family had become the focal point of their retaliation efforts. The reckoning that Cole had anticipated was about to begin, but it would extend far beyond the personal betrayal of his wife and the assault on his daughter. Troy Matthews represented a threat to military families throughout the region, and Cole understood that permanent security required the complete destruction of that threat network. Legal justice would handle some aspects of the problem, but Cole's military training had taught him that some enemies could only be stopped through direct action. The war for his family's safety was entering its most dangerous phase, and Cole was prepared to prosecute that war with every skill he possessed. Troy Matthews had made the mistake of escalating a personal conflict into an organized campaign against a special forces soldier's family. He was about to learn that some battles could only end with the complete destruction of one side or the other, and Cole Brennan had never known defeat when the stakes included protecting innocent lives. Chapter 8: The Hunt. The federal task force established their command center in a secure conference room 3 floors below Sophie's hospital room, transforming the medical facility into a fortress designed to protect one 8-year-old girl from a network of predators. Cole found himself working alongside FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, whose expertise in trafficking and organized exploitation cases had made her the lead investigator on what was rapidly expanding beyond a simple domestic dispute. Troy Matthews wasn't operating alone. Agent Santos briefed the assembled team, spreading surveillance photos across the conference table. We've identified at least 6 associates involved in systematic targeting of military families across 4 states. They use legitimate contractor positions to gain access to bases, then coordinate with corrupted social services personnel to manipulate custody situations. Cole studied the photographs with professional interest, memorizing faces and noting tactical details that might prove useful in future encounters. The network was more sophisticated than he had initially realized, operating with the kind of organizational structure that suggested significant financial backing and long-term strategic planning. What's their endgame? Cole asked. Are we talking about human trafficking, financial exploitation, or something else? Agent Santos exchanged glances with her partner before responding. All of the above, plus identity theft and benefit fraud. They target military families specifically because deployment cycles create vulnerability windows, and military benefits provide attractive financial incentives. Children are often used as leverage to control mothers who might otherwise resist manipulation. The revelation that Sophie had been targeted not just by Troy's personal desires, but as part of a larger criminal enterprise added urgency to Cole's growing conviction that legal remedies would be insufficient. Criminal networks could be disrupted by law enforcement, but they could also reconstitute with new leadership and continue operations. Permanent security required more decisive intervention. Danny Rodriguez entered the command center with intelligence that elevated the threat assessment significantly. Troy's bail was posted by a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Financial analysis suggests backing from sources with resources far beyond what we're seeing at the local level. This goes deeper than we thought. Cole felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place as he considered the implications. Troy hadn't been a lone predator who happened to target military families. He had been part of a coordinated operation designed to exploit the unique vulnerabilities created by military service. Amy had been manipulated not just by an individual sociopath, but by a criminal organization that specialized in destroying military families for profit. Where is Troy now? Cole asked. Agent Santos consulted her latest reports. Released to a halfway house in Louisville, with electronic monitoring and supervised movement. But our surveillance indicates the ankle bracelet was disabled within 6 hours of his release. He's gone. The confirmation that Troy had escaped official supervision while under federal investigation demonstrated either remarkable incompetence by authorities or active assistance from corrupted officials. Either possibility suggested that Cole's family remained in immediate danger from enemies who possessed both motivation and capability for retaliation. Cole's phone buzzed with a message from Martha, who was maintaining watch over Sophie. Men in suits asking questions at nurse's station. Sophie getting scared. Need you here. The text triggered Cole's immediate action, but Agent Santos intercepted him before he could leave the command center. Sergeant Brennan, I understand your concerns, but we need you to maintain operational discipline. Moving without coordination could compromise our surveillance efforts. Cole looked at the federal agent with the cold assessment of someone who had spent years operating in environments where hesitation meant death. Agent Santos, with all due respect, my daughter is afraid. Every minute we spend coordinating through official channels is another minute my family remains vulnerable to people who have already demonstrated willingness to hurt children. We have federal marshals positioned throughout the hospital, Agent Santos insisted. Sophie is protected by the full resources of federal law enforcement. Cole's response was delivered with quiet conviction that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Federal law enforcement failed to prevent Troy from escaping supervision while under investigation for child abuse. Federal law enforcement failed to detect a criminal network operating on military installations for years. My family's safety is now my responsibility, and I intend to handle it accordingly. The exchange represented a fundamental philosophical divide between law enforcement methodology and military operational doctrine. Agent Santos was focused on building prosecutable cases that would result in lengthy prison sentences for multiple defendants. Cole was focused on eliminating immediate threats to his daughter's safety through whatever means proved most effective. Cole left the command center despite Agent Santos' protests, understanding that his actions would likely be reported to military authorities as failure to cooperate with federal investigation. His immediate concern was Sophie's psychological state and the security vulnerabilities created by unknown individuals conducting unauthorized inquiries at the hospital. He found Martha standing guard outside Sophie's room, her body language suggesting maternal protectiveness elevated to dangerous levels. The elderly woman had positioned herself to observe all approaches to the room while maintaining visual contact with her granddaughter, demonstrating situational awareness that Cole recognized as instinctive rather than trained. 2 men claiming to be social workers, Martha reported quietly, asked detailed questions about Sophie's condition and when she might be discharged. Nurses couldn't find any authorization for their visit, and their identification looked questionable. Cole felt his tactical assessment of the situation shift as he realized that Troy's network was conducting reconnaissance for what might be a direct assault on the hospital. The inquiry about Sophie's discharge timeline suggested planning for an abduction attempt that would occur during patient transfer when security would be most vulnerable. Where are the federal marshals? Cole asked. Martha's expression darkened. 2 men in the lobby claiming to be federal agents, but they arrived after the fake social workers left. Timing seems convenient. The possibility that Troy's network had infiltrated federal law enforcement was disturbing but not unprecedented. Criminal organizations with sufficient resources often maintained corrupted contacts within government agencies, providing advance warning of official actions and coordination opportunities for criminal activities. Cole entered Sophie's room to find his daughter awake but withdrawn, clearly affected by the stress of constant security concerns and unfamiliar faces asking probing questions. Her physical injuries were healing, but the psychological impact of recent events was becoming increasingly apparent. Daddy, are the bad men going to take me away? Sophie asked quietly. Cole sat beside her bed and took her uninjured hand, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. No one is taking you anywhere, sweetheart. Daddy's here now, and I'm going to make sure you're safe. But Mom's friend said you couldn't protect us from far away. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, something bad would happen to you too. The revelation that Troy had used threats against Cole as leverage to control Sophie added another dimension to the psychological manipulation she had endured. An 8-year-old child had been forced to choose between her own safety and her father's welfare, a burden no child should carry, but one that demonstrated Troy's complete lack of moral constraints. Sophie, look at Daddy, Cole said, ensuring he had her complete attention. Troy lied to you about everything. He lied about Daddy not coming home. He lied about his authority over you, and he lied about being able to hurt Daddy. Do you understand that? Sophie nodded slowly, but Cole could see that Troy's psychological manipulation had created fears that would require time and patience to overcome. Trust, once broken by betrayal and violence, was not easily restored even in children who possessed natural resilience. Cole's contemplation was interrupted by Danny's voice through his earpiece. Multiple vehicles converging on hospital parking garage. Armed occupants confirmed. This is not a drill. The words triggered Cole's transition to combat readiness as he realized that Troy's network had decided to attempt direct action rather than continue surveillance and reconnaissance. They were about to discover what happened when a criminal organization declared war on a Special Forces soldier's family. Martha, take Sophie to the bathroom and lock the door, Cole instructed, his voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. Don't come out until I personally tell you it's safe. Cole drew his concealed weapon and moved toward the room's entrance, positioning himself to control access while maintaining cover from potential incoming fire. 6 years of combat experience had prepared him for this exact scenario, defending innocent lives against overwhelming odds in an urban environment. The hunt that Cole had been anticipating was finally beginning, but the roles had been reversed. Troy and his associates believed they were coming to collect their prize, but they were actually walking into a killing ground defended by someone trained to eliminate threats with extreme prejudice. Cole Brennan had spent years hunting enemies in foreign countries to protect American families. Now he would hunt enemies in his own country to protect his own family, and the rules of engagement would be entirely of his own making. Troy Matthews had chosen to escalate a personal conflict into organized warfare, and Cole intended to finish that war permanently. The battle for Sophie's safety and Cole's family honor was about to reach its culmination, and Cole had every intention of ensuring that his enemies learned the hard way what happened when they threatened a Special Forces soldier's child. Chapter 9. The Resolution. The attack came at 1,347 hours with tactical precision that confirmed Cole's assessment of his opponent's capabilities. 6 men in dark clothing emerged from stairwells and elevators simultaneously, moving with coordination that suggested military or law enforcement training. Their approach pattern was designed to overwhelm hospital security and create multiple access routes to Sophie's room. Cole watched their advance through security cameras that Danny had patched into his earpiece, identifying weapons and tactical gear that indicated serious intent. These weren't amateur criminals attempting opportunistic abduction. They were professionals executing a planned assault on a federal protection detail. Federal marshals in the lobby are down, Danny reported through radio communication. Unknown substances deployed, possibly chemical sedatives. Hospital security is requesting immediate evacuation of the pediatric wing. Cole realized that the attack was even more sophisticated than he had anticipated, employing non-lethal chemical weapons to neutralize official protection without creating obvious evidence of violence. Troy's network possessed resources and expertise that positioned them as a genuine threat to national security, not just individual families. From his position covering Sophie's room entrance, Cole could hear the approaching footsteps of multiple individuals moving with tactical precision through hospital corridors. Their coordination suggested professional leadership and extensive planning, but also revealed tactical vulnerabilities that Cole could exploit. Martha, move Sophie to the far corner and shield her with your body, Cole instructed quietly. No matter what happens, keep her eyes covered and don't let her see anything that's about to occur. Cole's tactical training identified the optimal defensive position to control access to the room while minimizing risk to civilians. The hospital's narrow corridors would force attackers to approach in limited numbers, negating their numerical advantage and allowing Cole to engage them individually rather than simultaneously. The first attacker appeared in the doorway at 1,349 hours, moving with professional confidence that evaporated the moment he encountered Cole's defensive position. Cole's years of combat experience had taught him that overwhelming violence applied at the moment of contact often eliminated opposition before they could effectively respond. The engagement was brief and decisive. Cole's military training had prepared him for exactly this scenario: close-quarters combat in confined spaces against multiple opponents. His movements were fluid and lethal, each action calculated to neutralize threats while maintaining position to protect the innocent lives behind him. The second and third attackers arrived within seconds of the first, but found themselves facing a defensive position that had been optimized for exactly their approach vector. Cole's tactical superiority became apparent as professional criminals discovered the difference between intimidating civilians and engaging a special forces soldier defending his family. Agent Santos and her tactical team arrived during the final phase of Cole's defense, finding hospital corridors littered with neutralized threats and medical staff beginning to emerge from lockdown positions. The federal response had been delayed by the chemical attack on their advance team, but Cole's independent action had eliminated the immediate danger. "Jesus Christ, Brennan," Agent Santos said, surveying the scene with professional assessment. 6 armed men taken down by 1 defender. That's either exceptional training or exceptional motivation. Cole's response was delivered while checking each attacker to ensure they posed no continuing threat. "Both. These men threatened my daughter, and I responded accordingly." The aftermath revealed the true scope of Troy's criminal network and their systematic targeting of military families. Electronic devices recovered from the attackers contained communication logs detailing operations against dozens of families across multiple states, financial records showing millions of dollars in fraudulent benefits claims, and evidence of corruption within child services agencies at state and federal levels. Troy Matthews himself was discovered in a surveillance vehicle 3 blocks from the hospital, coordinating the assault through encrypted communications while maintaining distance from actual violence. His capture provided federal investigators with access to the network's leadership structure and operational methods, effectively dismantling an organization that had operated with impunity for years. "The scope of this conspiracy is unprecedented," Agent Santos reported during the post-incident briefing. "Systematic exploitation of military families, corruption of government agencies, and use of children as leverage for financial fraud. Your family's resistance exposed an operation that was affecting hundreds of victims." Cole felt satisfaction at the confirmation that his actions had protected more than just his own family, but his primary focus remained on Sophie's recovery and long-term security. The immediate physical threat had been eliminated, but the psychological damage inflicted by Troy's manipulation would require time and professional intervention to fully address. Amy's role in the conspiracy remained legally complex, but her cooperation with federal investigators and obvious status as another of Troy's victims resulted in reduced charges and supervised probation rather than imprisonment. Her relationship with Cole and Sophie had been irreparably damaged, but she would maintain limited visitation rights under court supervision. The custody hearing 3 weeks later was largely ceremonial, with family court granting Cole full legal custody based on evidence of Amy's endangerment of Sophie and her cooperation with criminal activities. Sophie would remain with Cole and Martha, surrounded by family members who prioritized her safety above all other considerations. 6 months later, Cole had transitioned to civilian law enforcement as planned, accepting a detective position with Louisville Metro Police that specialized in crimes against children. His military experience and intimate understanding of predatory networks made him uniquely qualified to protect other families from threats similar to what his own family had endured. Sophie's recovery was gradual but steady, aided by professional counseling and the security of knowing that her father had eliminated the threats against her family permanently. She would carry psychological scars from Troy's abuse, but she would also carry the knowledge that her father had moved heaven and earth to protect her when she needed him most. Amy attempted reconciliation several times, but Cole's position remained unchanged. Trust, once broken by betrayal of this magnitude, could not be restored through apologies or promises of changed behavior. She had chosen Troy over her own daughter's safety, and that choice carried consequences that would last for the rest of their lives. Troy Matthews was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, his criminal network dismantled, and its assets seized for victim compensation. The other attackers received similarly lengthy sentences, effectively eliminating the organization that had terrorized military families for years. Patricia Mills lost her professional license and received a 10-year sentence for corruption and conspiracy, her career destroyed by the revelation of her systematic betrayal of the families she had sworn to protect. The Child Services Agency underwent complete reorganization following federal investigation into widespread corruption. On a quiet evening 1 year after the hospital assault, Cole sat on his front porch watching Sophie play in the yard under Martha's supervision. His daughter's laughter echoed across the neighborhood, a sound that had been absent during the dark months when Troy's influence poisoned their home. Danny Rodriguez joined him on the porch, both men sharing the comfortable silence of soldiers who had fought together and emerged victorious. The friendship forged in combat had extended to civilian life, with Danny serving as Sophie's honorary uncle and Cole's business partner in a private security firm specializing in protecting military families. "Any regrets?" Danny asked, referring to the violence that had been necessary to protect Sophie and eliminate Troy's network. Cole considered the question seriously before responding. "I regret that it took so long to recognize the threat. I regret that Sophie had to suffer because of my absence and Amy's choices. But I don't regret anything I did to protect my family once I understood what was at stake." The conversation was interrupted by Sophie running toward the porch, her arm fully healed and her spirit largely restored by months of security and unconditional love. She climbed into Cole's lap with the easy affection of a child who had never doubted her father's commitment to her welfare. "Daddy, Grandma says you're a hero who saved me from the bad men," Sophie said, looking up at him with eyes that had regained their innocence. "Is that true?" Cole hugged his daughter close, feeling the weight of every decision that had brought them to this moment of peace and security. "Daddy did what any father would do, sweetheart. I protected the most important thing in my life." Sophie smiled and settled against Cole's chest, secure in the knowledge that her father would always be there to shield her from harm. The trauma inflicted by Troy's abuse was healing, replaced by the unshakable confidence that came from knowing she was loved and protected by someone who would never betray that trust. As the sun set over Fort Campbell, Cole reflected on the lessons learned during the most challenging campaign of his military career. He had discovered that the most important battles were not fought in foreign countries against distant enemies, but at home against threats that targeted the innocent and defenseless. Troy Matthews had made the mistake of believing that distance and deception made military families vulnerable to exploitation. He had underestimated the lengths to which a father would go to protect his child, and the skills that a special forces soldier would bring to that protection. The war for Sophie's safety had been won decisively, with Cole's enemies either imprisoned or eliminated and his family's future secured through his own actions. Some battles could only be won through overwhelming violence applied without hesitation or mercy, and Cole had demonstrated his willingness to cross any line necessary to protect innocent lives. Troy's criminal network had been destroyed, Amy's betrayal had been punished, and Sophie's safety had been ensured through Cole's complete victory over those who had threatened his family. The resolution had come at a cost, but it was a price Cole would pay again without hesitation if circumstances required such action. Cole Brennan had served his country with honor in foreign wars, but his greatest victory had come in defense of his own family against enemies who had infiltrated his home. The skills learned in military service had found their highest purpose in protecting the one innocent life that mattered more to him than his own survival. In the gathering darkness of evening, Cole held his daughter close and knew that the price of her safety had been worth every sacrifice required to ensure it. Some battles were too important to lose, and some enemies too dangerous to allow survival. Cole had fought such a battle and emerged victorious, with his family's future secure and his conscience clear. The reckoning was complete, and justice had been served with the overwhelming finality that only a father's love could deliver. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.